This one is a no-brainer. Two of my all-time favorite actors in a movie about two of the most interesting people in European history. A razor-sharp script, phenomenal sets, many on location, and an intricate plot that moves about 3 steps faster than my tiny little brain can work. Obviously, The Lion in Winter is amazing. The Lion in Winter is an adaptation of a 1966 stage play which also had a phenomenal cast. I sometimes feel like many stage adaptations wedge establishing shots and new locations in to fool the audience that this stage play is better as cinema. But what actually happens is we're just reminded that we ought to be in this small room with these actors who can make us feel. The Lion in Winter uses its on-location castles to truly open up the scope, contrasting the broad, chilly French countryside against the claustrophobic life inside a fortified, insulated castle. Even worse when you're locked up in a dungeon. Occasionally, the John Barry score does make you think, oh hey, that's the James Bond guy. But the movie goes for an immediacy the stage would struggle to accomplish. There's something wonderful about this dirty castle full of dogs and chickens where you can only tell that Peter O'Toole is the king because, well...
he hasn't got shit all over him. Is that for me? I love Christmas.
The play covers a Christmas holiday in Chinon for the English royal family, who own about half of France at the time, largely thanks to the political prowess of the patriarch Henry II, played by Peter O'Toole, backed in the film by the military prowess of his eldest surviving son, Richard the Lionheart, played by Anthony Hopkins. Henry wants his youngest son, John, the villain from the Robin Hood films. Anyhow, Henry wants John to take the throne when he dies. His wife, Eleanor of Aquitaine, who I'll go to in a minute, wants Richard to be king. Nobody cares about their other child, Geoffrey. The movie opens with a near hallucinatory sequence in which Henry's marshal summons the 3 sons. We see John sweating and struggling in a backyard sword fight. Then Richard, who decimates a rival in a jousting tournament but can't bring himself to deal the final blow. And then Geoffrey, puppeteering the ambush of some soldiers with overwhelming force, while himself tucked away at a safe distance. In both the Richard and Geoffrey segments, it's hinted that this scenario might actually just be a fantasy playing in their heads. Otherwise, how could the messenger walk right onto the battlefield and stop the action with a couple of words?
Geoffrey! Father wants to see me.
Following this dreamlike introduction, director Anthony Harvey and screenwriter James Goldman deliver a very grounded film. Goldman, who wrote the original stage play, also wrote quirky melodramas like the Audrey Hepburn and Sean Connery old people's flick Robin and Marian, the delusional Sherlock Holmes comedy They Might Be Giants, and the Cold War thriller about dancers White Knights. In all 3, a mighty hero, a great rebel, a great detective, a pair of world-class hoofers, shudder at the realization that time is just slipping by them. The director, Anthony Harvey, mostly worked as an editor, but I will recommend a comedy he directed, also starring Katherine Hepburn and Nick Nolte, called Grace Quigley. It's a very odd film about a hitman and a retiree who accidentally start an assassin's ring for euthanasia. The film is so bonkers you'd expect Gary Busey to be the male lead instead of Nick Nolte. Like in that lesser-known comedy, Hepburn here plays an older woman who will not let life be pried out of her grip.
I'd hang you from the nipples, but you'd shock the children.
Eleanor of Aquitaine was one of the richest and most powerful women in Europe. She ditched her husband, the King of France, for Henry II, and then joined her sons in leading an insurrection against Henry. Most of the film's best lines go to Henry and Eleanor, who spend the holiday plotting elaborately against each other. She spends most of her life imprisoned in England, and loves Henry so much that she wants to destroy him. Henry is tired of struggling against France, and against his wife, and against his sons. scenes. Both Eleanor and Henry are witty, vicious, brilliant strategists who love hating each other about as much as they love each other. A lot of this film revolves around strategic chunks of France that have been conquered by Henry or acquired through his marriage. You don't need to be an expert on French geography for this, just know that Aquitaine, Brittany, and the Vexin have crucial military access if you want to pressure France from the west. Don't worry about that, it's hard enough just following the power couple's moves against each other using their 3 sons and Henry's mistress, who's Princess of France and must marry one of the boys, as pawns. What they don't count on is their house guest, King Philippe of France, the teenage brother of Henry's mistress, who recently ascended the enemy throne. Timothy Dalton is shockingly good as Philippe in what I believe was his first big screen role. He plays with the intimacy of what can be done with the camera, and he delivers the most quietly Machiavellian performance in a movie full of delicious schemers. This movie is fiction, of course, so it's interesting to me to check out a parallel narrative, Shakespeare's King John. In that, John is not the sniveling imbecile shown here.
You're a stinker and you stink!
Yeah, Mother. Mother always did like Richard best.
And his closest ally is actually Eleanor of Aquitaine in the Bard's version, which is admittedly about as fictionalized as Lion and Winter. When his mother dies in Shakespeare, John pretty much loses all of his resolve. And while it's in the bottom tier of Shakespeare histories for me, it was interestingly the first Shakespeare on film, with Henry Beerbohm Tree in the lead role for a few seconds. I will say that this is a movie I've revisited many times over 35 years, and it feels quite different today than it did when I was a teenager. The scheming was delightfully confusing when I was a kid, and the performances, especially O'Toole and Hepburn, were almost all I needed to wear down our VHS copy. As someone Henry's age now, it's a different story. The magnetic personalities of Henry and Eleanor hold just as much sway as when I was young, but their cruelty and weakness, well, it hits a lot harder.
Well, what family doesn't have its ups and downs?
Both are tyrannical and threatening to everyone around them. Both admit to cheating, Henry bragging about it to his mistress as a joke. Their complete dismissal of Geoffrey as funny.
John, you're so clean and neat. And Richard, don't look sullen, dear. It makes your eyes go small and piggy. Geoffrey. Is Philip here yet?
But it's a heartbreaker in real life. It's a Christmas movie that acts like a Thanksgiving movie, and maybe I'll say more about that in November. The second half piles emotional weight on top of all the witty dialogue and conniving, and that's less fun, although it's not less clever.
May we? That's what tapestries are for.
Until the king and queen are so exhausted they can no longer poke and prod at each other, and they just fall on the floor to embrace. These people are nothing if not resilient. So we end the movie with an upbeat farewell between two people who can't stand each other, and they can't live without each other. It's all kind of a game for them, but what good is a game if you don't want your opponent to lose? As a 50-year-old, this movie is partially a cautionary tale.
How? From where we started, did we ever reach this Christmas?
Step by step.
I should have been a great fool not to love you.